JP's podcast. I'm your host, Dr. JP, and today we will talk about living reality, liberation through non-duality. My extraordinary summer with Sailor Bob Adamson with James Braha.
Are we starting?
Yeah, sure. We already did.
Are people going to hear that talk we just had?
Probably.
Oh, okay.
I'm so lazy editing, it takes time and there is no time. So why edit?
Okay. So basically, I was a seeker from the age of 20. I started transcendental meditation. I was in college. I was an actor. I started transcendental meditation. I came from a very dysfunctional childhood, family home. It was miserable. I started meditating. Life got a lot better. I went to Switzerland to become a TM teacher. And that, from the age of 20, I was on the spiritual path. And way back at the age of 20, I heard that the world is Maya, the world's an illusion, but it had no meaning. Nobody was living like it had no meaning. It just, had no meaning to me. I mean, some meaning, but didn't touch me. And I spent about 10 years in the meditation movement from 20 to 28 or something like that. And then I left that movement for various reasons. Most spiritual groups eventually get corrupt, they get problematic. So I left. I kept meditating and I kept searching. I did everything that I could do to gain this great enlightenment where there would be no suffering at all. There would be all bliss. There would be powers and miracles. And I believed that story. Like most people did, without ever questioning it. If there were to be no suffering and a person was completely free of the reference point, you could go to them and say, hey, Krishna, hey, Satchidananda, my job in life is killing. I'm a murderer. I like to kill people. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to kill someone today. I can either kill your relative here, or I can go to a different town. Now, if that guru or that wonderfully enlightened person says, no, it's okay, kill my son, that's fine. That's a zombie, and you wouldn't want to chase enlightenment, would you? You'd say, I don't want to be like that. I'd rather suffer and have some attachments to my loved ones. On the other hand, if he tells you, no, don't kill my kids, go over there and kill someone else, you have now touched their reference point. In other words, they may not be attached to money like I am. They may not be attached to fame like I am, but they're attached to their relative. They don't want it. So, in other words, nobody escapes the reference point. No matter how enlightened you get, no matter how many walls you can walk through, how many psychic powers you have, nobody escapes the fact that there's a reference point and there will be some suffering from time to time. So if I had understood that way back there in 1970, 71, 72, then I would have had a better understanding that enlightenment is not what they sell you. It's not the all bliss, the all miracles. It just doesn't exist like that, which means that there is no difference between a Buddha and an ordinary person. Now, there's an apparent difference. The apparent difference is that highly enlightened person doesn't get upset all the time. They don't fear death. They don't have a lot of attachments, whereas the other person who's never done anything spiritual is completely attached. They think the world is real. They go through a lot more suffering. But both of them have a reference point. It's the explanation I always use is, I play guitar. Paul McCartney plays guitar. Of course, he's about 1 million times better, but there's no essential difference between two guitar players. There's no essential difference between a Buddha and an ordinary person. There's an apparent difference, okay? Anyway, I didn't know this at the time, so I was doing all that seeking. After TM, I tried every technique you could try. Not everyone, but a good, 20 or 30 of them. I tried the meditations of different gurus. I tried I tried macrobiotics. I tried workshops like EST and LifeSpring. I tried bioenergetic analysis. I mean, it was a million things that I tried, spiritual as well as self-development. And basically, you can do those things until the cows come home. And it's like peeling an onion. You will get better. If you do those techniques and you do the self-improvement, you will get better. But it'll be like peeling an onion, but the onion never stops getting peeled, because you can continue getting less anxious, more relaxed, more peaceful, but it does not end that sense of separation from the source. Those techniques, they open the mind, they open you up, they get you ready for the truth, but they don't. And so by the time I was 53, well, actually 53, I think, was when Bob came to stay with, Sailor Bob came to stay with me. By the age of about 47, 48, I had given up on the idea of miracles and powers and nonstop bliss and all that. All I wanted was an end to the suffering, an end to the sense of separation, which had not budged, hadn't budged. So in my career, I'm an astrologer. I wrote the first book on Hindu astrology in the Western world. You can see it in the background, that white square white one. That was Hindu astrology for Westerners. And I had a big career, and I was around, God, when was it? Well, he was Sailor Bob came in 2004. This would have been around 2001, 2002, something like that. I'm giving a lecture at the Sedona Vedic Astrology Conference. And after it's over, this guy from the audience comes up and starts talking to me. And my wife says, "Hey, I know you from Fairfield, where the TM organization was." And so they started talking. And then I said, "Well, you know, everybody meditated for 30, 40 years. Nobody got enlightened." He said, "That's not true." I said, "Come again?" Because all you ever hear is the guru on top is enlightened and everybody else is searching forever and they never get there. And they're told it'll be in some other lifetime. Great. So, and in fact, Sailor Bob, when people used to say to Sailor Bob, well, you know, I've heard that you have to keep meditating, and then eventually he said, "Yeah, go ahead, try it. Go ahead and try it. You can try it till you're blue in the face. You don't get there from the meditation." So, so I said, "Well, who got enlightened?" So he said, "I'm going to get you a book." He gets me a book called Meeting Papaji. Papaji was a guru in India. He had passed away by 2000. And he had lots of disciples, and he was basically pretty non-dual. He was like a non-dualist. But the difference between him and the other non-dualists is that he had lots of miracles. He was going around India and he was seeing Krishna and Shiva. He would take his disciples to go to temples around India. They'd get on a bus, waiting for the bus to leave. He'd say, "Oh, everybody, come on, get off, we're leaving." "Why are we leaving?" "We're leaving." And that bus then a couple hours later fell off a cliff. I mean, there were all these stories of Papaji. And I'm very skeptical when it comes to stories. But I was an astrologer doing readings by phone for people all over the world. And I met a lot, you know, as I was talking to spiritual people getting their astrology readings, I would mention Papaji. They say, "Those stories are all true. I was there." So, you know, there were lots of, anyway. So, I get this, and that sets me on the path of non-duality, Advaita. And suddenly, as I'm reading the books, I'm suddenly realizing, holy cow, this is attainable. You could actually get to the point where you simply understand with complete conviction. That's the key. Some people say, "Yes, I know I'm consciousness. I know I'm not the body. And I know I'm not the thoughts and the feelings in the body. I know that." But somehow they're still suffering. They're still attached, because they don't know it with full conviction. So I'm reading several books, and I'm starting to say, this is actually possible. You could actually reach this final state, so to speak, even though it's not that there's no suffering, it's not that there's all bliss, not that, but there's no attachment. There's no great attachment to the desires. There's still desires, but the attachments to them, the great attachments to them are gone. And it's the attachments that bring you back in the next life if you die. Now, this is not a non-dual, Sailor Bob would be arguing with me. There is no reincarnation. But then I'd say, but in the appearance, he'd say in the appearance, anything is possible. So in the appearance, I'm sure there's reincarnation because I do astrology and I see people's horoscopes from the day they're born. I know what their lives are going to be. So there's obviously, it could be random and I'm reading the chart, but I believe it's from karma. Anyway, so this woman, this friend named Merrill, she says, well, the best book on non-duality is by Sailor Bob Adamson. It's called What's Wrong with Right Now, Unless You Think About It. What's wrong with right now, unless you think about it. So now there could be grief. If somebody died, you'd have a period of grief. That's a natural state. If somebody's got your head in a vice and they're squeezing, it's going to be painful. But the attachment parts are gone. The attachment to dying, the attachment to money, the attachment to power, and it's gone once you realize the world is an illusion. It's like a dream. It's like a movie. It comes and goes. And our true nature cannot be cut by the sword, drowned by water, burned by fire, blown by wind. The true nature cannot. Once you understand that, then it doesn't matter what happens to the James body or the James thoughts or the James feelings, because that's not who I am. But I didn't know this at the time. So I read Sailor Bob's book. I read about 10 pages and I go, oh my God. Oh my God. Now I was 53 by this time. I had given up on the fact, I always had a sense, believe it or not. I mean, I started when I was 20. This was 35 years later. And I had seen all the gurus. They got attached to money. They got attached to sex. I don't know if they got attached to them, but they sure had scandals. And it sure pressed their buttons if you took their money or if they did, So I was disgusted with the whole field of enlightenment. I said, well, what good is enlightenment if these gurus are behaving like this anyway? Maybe there's no such thing, So I get 10 pages into this book. And I was going to say, I had always had a sense that someday I would actually have a personal guru. In TM, there's a guru and there's 10,000 disciples. That's not a personal guru. I always had a sense that someday, but I'd given up on it. I hoped for one, but I wouldn't bet that there would ever be one. I read this book. I read 10 pages of it. It knocks me out. I got to tell you, I wound up writing Living Reality, the book about my experience with Sailor Bob, which, by the way, is now in a new, it's not edited. It's not much different, but it's a new cover. You get it on Amazon. But anyway, even though I had, done on this and written books, I never finished his book. I didn't need to. In the first 10 pages, I could see the whole book was the same message. It was very simple. That didn't mean my path was over. It wasn't. But so now I know I needed to see this guy. But I had given up traveling on planes overseas because about 3 or 4 years before that, I had a panic. I was exhausted after my son was born. It's a long story, but I was so exhausted. And I got on this plane, had a panic attack and had to leave the plane. So I was not going to get on a plane overseas again for a while. I said, how am I going to get this guy to? So I basically wind up inviting him to come to my house. Now, I'm 71. If somebody invites me to go to Russia or Europe to teach, I'm going to say, get lost. I have no desire for it. I have no need for it. What am I going to, he was 75. He's not traveling. He has no desire to do it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I talked to him on the phone. And then I think I wrote him a letter, or I asked. No, I think when I asked him, he said, "No, I'm not traveling. I don't do that." But then at some point, I wrote him a letter, or an email or something, and he said, "Well, I just don't travel anymore. Blah blah blah. But maybe." I thought maybe. He said, "But maybe." So this guy doesn't know me from Adam. He doesn't know who I am. So I'd written 4 books by that point. And one of them was autobiographical about my experiences going to India learning astrology. So I quick send him the book so he can know who's inviting him. So he reads the book. He and his wife read the book. And he said, I haven't given my wife a vacation. I haven't been able to give her a vacation. She'd like it. So maybe. And the next thing you know, they decide, okay, they're going to come. Now, the excitement of having this guy, who to me is as enlightened, as free as anybody could be. I'm just going by the book. I'm going by a couple of phone conversations. The thrill was beyond belief. And it was my summer, which was his winter, because he was in Australia. That's why he wanted to come. So in the month or 2 that I was waiting for him to come, I cannot describe the sense of excitement. We're going to have this enlightened guy. Now you have to understand, back then my concept of enlightenment was still that he's going to walk on water and he's going to, I don't really believe he's going to walk on water, but that he's a very special human being to be honored and revered, blah, blah, blah. So he gets there, he gets to the Tampa airport, which is about an hour away from where we live. We drive there. And I didn't realize, I knew it was a long trip, 27 hours, but I didn't know, I think it was 27 hours with all the stops. And I didn't know that. That's a long time to be traveling, not sleeping. Anyway, but really, I read everything you could read. I wanted to look in his eyes and see, does this guy for real? So they arrive, they're tired. We all hug. I look in his eyes and I say, oh my God, he looks like the real thing. Simply because he just looked free. He didn't look like he had baggage. He didn't look like he had suffering from a divorce, bad memories. People, you look at their faces and you can see, they got problems from the past, and he just looked free, completely free. So I was very excited. So meanwhile, they were nervous because, I had sent them pictures of our cottage. We have a cottage in the backyard, to let them know they'd have their own place and blah, blah, blah. But still, Barbara told me, his wife Barbara said, our friend said, are you crazy? You're going to stay with this guy? You don't know him, blah, blah. That's why I sent the book. So they knew me. So we have the hour-and-a-half drive home. They open up the cottage, the cottage door. And our cottage was very nice. It was fairly new. It was just very comfortable. And Bob's eyes brightened. He was like, oh, relief. We're going to have a nice stay here for 5 weeks. The next morning, I wake up around 6:30, and I look out my window, and there's Bob underneath my fruit trees. I used to have about 40 fruit trees, mangoes, avocados, everything, peaches. He's sitting under the tree, just sitting there. So I go out, and I bring my little recorder. I wasn't going to let him say a word without my little recorder. So we start talking, and all I can remember is very quickly saying, is it really true that the world is a dream? He says, of course. How could it be anything other than something temporary? It can't be real because it has no independent nature. So it comes and it goes. The world comes and goes like a dream, like a movie, whatever you want to call it. But the awareness or the consciousness that was never born and never dies, that's the real true oneness. The awareness or consciousness or nothingness or space, whatever you want to call it, was never born, never dies. It just is. And that's our true nature. And when the world is destroyed, big deal, the world goes away. But then if consciousness somehow makes another creation, it makes another creation. Doesn't really matter, because the awareness or the consciousness, that's everything. That's everything. That's who we are. No thing. So he tells me this, and suddenly I'm like, wow, yeah, okay. So that thing I heard 30 years ago, they weren't lying. It's an illusion. I mean, the fact of it is, half the world believes in Maya, but almost nobody lives that way. Oh, it's really important if this politician wins. It's really important. I mean, I lived for 15 years from, from about 30 to 45, wondering what kind of God or creator would allow all the killing and the murdering. But when you understand that everything that's happening it feels very real and we experience it like it is, but in fact, it's a movie. And this is why you could have 50 million or 100 million people die in World War II. You can have all this catastrophe and millions of, 50 million souls all destroyed. You'd think that that would make a difference. No, it doesn't make any difference. We're having fun now. After the war's over, people are still living, life is going on. It's like it didn't happen. It did happen in one sense, but anyway, so that was big. The next day he says to me, James, your countenance is like completely different. It's because actually really believing, understanding. And when I say belief, I don't like believing anything. It has to be proven. You have to have some experience of it. And if I can't find a James, if the body, the thoughts, and the feelings come and go, and then I look for, well, who is James? All I find is this emptiness or consciousness. That to me lets me know, yes, James is not real. Neither is the war. Neither is the murders. Neither is the gurus who are doing terrible things. The whole thing's like a movie. So anyway, but that doesn't mean I was finished. Now, as I wrote in the book, my fate was sealed that morning. The night that I saw him and I said, wow, this guy does seem to have it. And the next morning when I realized it's a dream, no matter how real it feels. We do go through grief. If somebody dies, we grieve. If we have a divorce, we grieve. But that's a grief. That's just a natural thing. And then there's physical pain, but other than that, other than grief and physical pain, we suffer for one reason only, attachment. If I'm attached to my looks and says, wow, you are really, not very good looking, I'm going to get upset. If they say, hey, you don't look so good, I say, well, I never cared about my looks anyway. It's not what I cared about. If you care about money and somebody takes your money, it's a big problem. But if you're not attached to money, it's not a big deal if you lose it. Not that it's fun, but the attachments, it's whether the attachments are there. So anyway, Bob stays in the house for 5 weeks. It is the most glorious experience you can imagine. And I'm going to tell you something. Bob is 91 or 92. He just came out of the hospital. He had surgery. It was a bad surgery too. It was a difficult one. He was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And I told this to Bob the other night because I have been reading Living Reality for the last 3 weeks. I had to read it very slowly because, as I said, I made a new cover for the book. So I had to go through and edit the book to make sure there were no, problems or anything. And so it was really on my mind for a couple of weeks. And I said to Bob, Bob, when you were at our house, there were 2 times there was an apparent reference point where Sailor Bob. So when Bob was there, we never saw his reference point. He didn't get angry. He didn't have any attachments. People would come in the house and they would ask their questions and they'd walk away and they just didn't get anything he said. It meant nothing to him, whether they got it or didn't get it. He'd say, wow, that's great. He really got it. Or they did. But there were no reference points. You just couldn't see them. But there was one other time I saw a reference point, which is really fascinating. Bob was here 20 years ago. Okay. So, a lot of the stories I've forgotten, et cetera, et cetera. But I had a realization. This is all conceptual. It's pure concept. It's bullshit, basically, because it's a concept. But it is a concept that for me felt real. I'm reading the book, and Bob said, I'm reading where Bob said, I don't travel. I have no desire to travel. And then I'm reading, there were some, I recorded all the sessions that we had. And Barb was saying, Bob said, there's no way I'm going to America. I'll never do that. And look, here we are, because this is what the dream, this is how the dream went. Okay. So as I'm reading and editing the book, I'm realizing that Bob gets this book, reads this book. Now, not consciously, but subconsciously, his mind may have said, oh, this guy's a teacher. If I go over there, he'll teach non-duality if he gets it. He didn't say that. I'm just saying it just struck me. And part of it was because one of the first days that Barb got there, she said, James, if you learn non-duality and you wind up teaching it, I know Bob's going to be very happy. She said that to me. So anyway, so I'm realizing, 20 years later, as I'm reading it, I'm saying, Bob's subconscious must have said, oh, this guy's a teacher, it might be worth spreading the word. Not that he would have enough attachment to get on a plane for 27 hours. The dream brought him here. That's just what happened. But anyway, that was the concept. And here's why, okay? The second time, now I didn't see the reference point. I only heard about it from Barb. But I saw a reference point one day. It was a week or two in, and there were two friends of mine, Carrie and Emmett, that were from high school and college, and we knew each other our whole lives. We were all TM teachers. We were all on the spiritual path together. They both came to visit. And for the first 2 weeks, there were really very few outside visitors. The last 3 weeks he was there, people came from Chicago, they came from California, they flew to my house to do that. And by the way, the reason he was there I didn't know, when they said, how long should we come? I said, come as long as you like, 3 weeks, I don't know. So Barbara said 5 weeks. I said, okay. And I thought, 5 weeks, will we keep them, they won't be too bored. But she said 5 weeks because that's what she stayed with Nisargadatta for 5 weeks, and she got it really good. So she said 5 weeks. Okay. So the last 3 weeks were for the visitors around the country. The first were just for Bob and Barbara. I said, do you want to go to Disney World? We live in Florida. You want to go to see the museums? He said, no, nothing. No desires to do anything but talk non-duality all day long. So one of the friends, Carrie, has a very good sense of humor. And we were always talking about how when people study non-duality, they want to be teachers. They want to be gurus. I'm the great guru. I got the enlightenment and you're the non-enlightened. And we would talk about that. And we would joke about how people would, the sages would say, don't hang out a shingle. If people ask you, teach it, but you don't go out and, which is interesting because I was on the path for 30 years by then. And I thought if I ever found the answer, I'd be shouting from the rooftops. But the answer that I got was that there's no problem. The world's going on. Some people are in the dream. Some people are not in the dream. What's the problem? And I don't want to force somebody to lose their dream. The dream is fun. You win, you lose, you win, you lose. You stop losing. You stop winning and losing when you get non-duality. The dream is over. It doesn't matter if you get fame. It doesn't matter if you get money. The dream's over. So I don't want to stop somebody's dream if they're having fun. But if they're looking for it, then I'm going to help them. If they're looking to get out of the dream, I'll help them. So anyway, we're talking about how these people get non-duality, and they like to tell these fancy stories about how nature forced them to teach. Nature brought them to teach, and we would joke about it. So one day we're in the restaurant. There was a restaurant called the I can't remember the name. I can't remember. It'll come to me later. We're in this restaurant, and Bob sees a painting on the wall that's crooked. So he tells Carrie, hey, fix that thing, it's crooked. So he fixes it. And the next day we're having a talk. We're all, talking non-duality in my living room. And all of a sudden Carrie says, Bob has authorized me to teach. He told me to go out and make the crooked straight. Go out and make the crooked straight. He's authorized me to teach, right? So I get up because I hear in the laundry room, I hear that the laundry has gone, the bell rang and I had to go and change the laundry. So I get up and I say, oh, good. So I won't have to teach. And I go to the laundry room, and what do I see? Bob follows me into the laundry room and says, what's this about you're not teaching? I said, what? He says, what's this about you're not teaching? I said, oh, I was just joking. He said, oh. And then I said, he wants me to teach, It was just, it wasn't like, oh, I'm going to teach because he told me. That wasn't the case. It was just, oh, I saw a reference point. In the 5 weeks he was there, so it's the only reference point I ever experienced. And the dream is going to take you where it's going to take you. Now, I'm an astrologer, and in my horoscope, there's no doubt I'm an astrologer. That's my purpose. That's my, within the concept of the illusion, I'm an astrologer, not a non-duality teacher. But Bob wanted me to teach, and I love Bob. So I started a website. Probably after he left, I started the website. But I wasn't going to teach just because he said to teach. It would have to come natural. And I cannot to this day remember exactly when I started writing the book. I think it was 2 days after he left, or maybe 2 days before he left. I started writing. It just came out naturally. I started to write the book. And I know it was before, because in the book, I tell how when Bob got back to Australia, he said, teach people, keep things going, write the book, which means I had already started I know I started the book within a couple of days of him leaving. And I did teach for a while. I did teach. It was never, I always wondered, I couldn't understand how people would keep coming back. Now, this is weird, because I had been on the path for 30 years. And when Bob was there, he was there for 5 weeks. I was still asking questions till the day he was. I said, what do I do if a person comes and asks XYZ? He say, what are you talking about? A person's going to come in the future. There is no future, James. So I was asking questions right up until the last moment. It was not until after he left that the sense of separation was gone. It wasn't until after he left. And I remember going to the bathroom in the middle of the night about a week or two after he was gone, and it was completely different. It was completely the same. I got up, went to the bathroom, went back to bed, but it was also completely different. The difference was, before Sailor Bob, I would get up to go to the bathroom, and I think, what's going to happen to my son when I die? What's going to happen if this problem comes along? What's going to happen if that problem? It was always something that could go wrong, always. And suddenly, one night, I went to the bathroom and went back to sleep. That's all. And I said, whoa, something is different. And like I say, I'm completely the same. It's not dramatic. It's just that there's no attachments. I still worry about death. I mean, the James is going to be gone. The James is going to be gone. How incredibly upsetting is that? It's the me going to be gone. Well, that me was suddenly torn apart. And the other thing to explain is that I've had a very interesting life. I was an actor. I was an astrologer. I've written by now 7 books, but basically I look at the life, and I had massive suffering for the first 18 years, 20 years. And then the meditation was a huge change. But basically, when I look at my life, I look at my life before Sailor Bob and my life after Sailor Bob. That's how I look at it. Everything is completely the same and yet completely different, because there's no there's desires, but there's no great attachment to those desires. And it's very interesting also that one of the biggest effects that I had, first of all, if you're studying non-duality and you don't want, people say, I'm studying non-duality, but I get caught in the reference point. All right, you want to not get caught in the reference point? I'll tell you how to do it. Not that you'll ever completely, but if you're getting caught in the reference point 30% and you want to get only caught 20% or 10%, this is how you do it. You talk non-duality all the time. Now, I wasn't talking non-duality all the time. I was writing the book every day. I was steeped in the non-duality. And what was happening during those 7, 8, 9 months of writing that book was something that had never happened before. Desires were getting fulfilled without any effort, with very little effort, because the attachments weren't there. So I wasn't making a lot of efforts for stuff. Somehow desires would get fulfilled. And I remember this great this great experience that I had. I'm going to try to show you a picture of this guy Del. Del was he still is a massage therapist, and he would do Traeger, and he would do different massage techniques and stuff. This is a picture of Del. And Del used to give Bob and Barbara massages and such. Anyway, this was about 6-7 months after Bob had left, and I was writing my book, which means I was completely immersed in non-duality. So we're sitting at there's an outdoor, I don't know what it was, like Halloween or some outdoor thing at night. And there was a lot of people, it's a party. And we're talking, this is a round table, 7 or 8 of us at the round table, and we're talking. And I'm complaining about my son, about something or other. And the woman doesn't like what I said. So she starts complaining. And, but, now I'm like, well, what am I supposed to do? Do I care? Am I going to, so she's complaining. All right, let her complain. And after a while, it starts to get obnoxious. And I'm thinking, I may have to actually say something. And I'm thinking, do I want to say something? Do I have to say something, or she's not going to shut up? As I'm trying to consider what to do, Del says, "Lady, what are you doing?" I'm just expressing how when you're completely immersed in non-duality, it's not like now that might not happen because I'm doing astrology and I'm working and I'm not completely, constantly thinking, oh, I'm no one, I'm nothing. It's not like that. But anyway, so if you want to, if you understand fully, if someone was going to put a gun to your head and said, who are you? Are you a person, or who are you? And if you don't get it right, I'm going to shoot you. And I better say I'm consciousness. That's who I am. So I don't die. If you know that, but at the same time, you get caught in the reference point. Ow, why'd they say that? That sort of thing. And you want to get out of that, talk non-duality all the time. It'll happen less and less because you'll be, it'll be on your mind all the time. At the same time, the longer that you live with non-duality, as Bob used to say, it's not that it gets deeper, it doesn't get any deeper, but it gets more fully ingrained, so to speak. It's just more natural, etc. On the other hand, if you're like Bob, like, I'm going to say some funny stuff here. Bob's 92. By the age of 80, Bob and Barbara was gone by now. She probably died 5 years after he was, after they came here, about 5 years after they came to America, she died. And then he was alone for some years. And during those years, maybe he was 83, 84, I don't know what. And he was alone, single. And he'd say to me, we would have Skypes. And he'd say, James, I really wouldn't mind just going to sleep and not waking up. And you know what I used to say to him? I used to say, Bob, you need to get some stress in your life. You need to get some stress so the body will break down. I'm just joking, but I'm serious too, because I got to tell you, we thought Bob was going to last another 3 or 4 years. But part of that was because he had COPD and, had a hard time getting a breath. And we didn't know that you could live with this, having a hard time to get a breath. But he had told Del, who was massaging him. Del came to me and said, Bob said he's not going to be around much longer because he's got colon cancer or something. I don't know, something that was, something that wasn't going to kill him quickly, but, would eventually get him. It's 20 years later. He's still here. There's just no stress in his life. He just doesn't. He lives to teach non-duality. And I said, Bob, so what makes you want to teach? He says, I really don't know, James. It's just what's happening. It's like if somebody comes to you and they say, hey, I'm trying to get to the grocery store. Do you know where it is? He said, yeah, it's go that way, make a left. There's no desire about it. But this was the most exciting time of my life. But more importantly, it was that when it was over, the sense of separation was gone. And I haven't had that. I've had suffering. I've had upsets, ups and downs, things like that, but nothing like the kind of upsets you would have if you didn't know your true nature. That's a whole other story.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful, James.
I told you I was a talker.
I love this. I just love this. I love this more than the sound of my own voice. So that's much said. Just a quick question or a comment. When you said about talking non-duality all the time, to me, it sounds like basically the injunction there is just telling yourself the truth, right?
Say that again.
To me, talking non-duality all the time, if you want to reduce the reference point, sounds to me like basically the injunction there is to tell yourself the truth.
It's not telling yourself. I'm going to mention something religious. It's just a concept. But isn't there something about Christ saying, go out, as you spread the word, it'll deepen within you? So I'm not talking about, I mean, you could walk around saying, I am consciousness, but I mean, that's ridiculous. If you're talking to other people, they're going to come up with questions. You're going to come up with creative ways to answer them. It's just going to get deeper. I have to tell you, there's different personalities. Bob has read everything you could possibly read. He loves the subject. From the time that Bob left, I could not read anything spiritual. And I wrote a book. After I wrote the book, people said, I get emails, James, you got to read what this guy said, the way he expresses non-duality. I would read 2 or 3 sentences and I'd say, yeah, it's the same thing. It's like ABC, 1 and 1 is 2, 1 and 1 is 2. I can't read it. That doesn't mean it's wrong to keep reading. It means my personality is very goal-oriented. When I got to the goal, I said, what do I need to read the different expressions of it? But that's not the case for Bob. He loved reading about it. He loves hearing the way this guy expresses it and this woman expresses it. He loves that. I don't. It just bores me. It's just the same old stuff.
Yeah. One comment on contagion. You mentioned in your book, in Living Reality, there's a quote from the book. Whenever Bob spoke of being free of a reference point, and looked you in the eye, you experienced what he was describing. So there seemed to be this contagious effect on his
This was upsetting because Carrie, my friend Carrie, was in my house for a week. And we were high as a kite. We were just, this is fantastic. And it was great. Meanwhile, I still felt separate. I did still feel separate, but the experiences were great. We were just feeling great. He goes back up to Connecticut, and about 3 or 4 days later, he says, James, I got to warn you. There's a power source in your house. He says, yes, we got his teaching, we got his understanding, but when he's gone from your house, your experience may not be the same. But, like I say, it wasn't a big deal. It was just something subtle that other people mentioned as well. They would say, it's like this. Yesterday, I was talking to someone who's living here, a young man, about 30, who's, I think chasing enlightenment. So I said, I'm going to give this guy a Living Reality book. And I gave him the book. And then I said, well, let me tell you what the book's about. And I wound up talking non-duality for about 20, 30 minutes. I would bet anything that he went away and for the next couple hours felt really free. How do I know this? Because I get people who call me up. They look me up on the internet, they call me up or they Skype or something, and they feel great. They walk away feeling, oh, wow, yes, I know who I am, and I feel great, and I feel not attached. And then, and I always say, so look, if you need me in the future, let me know, because I know, and I tell them, I explain to them, look, there's a very strong, it's happened to Bob. Bob went into Nisargadatta. He was with Nisargadatta. He left Nisargadatta's flat and he said, I am free. I'll never get stuck in the reference point again. He left the flat and within minutes, he was back in the reference point. But now he knew that the reference point is false. So even though he get caught in it, he would give it less energy. And he describes it like a fan. When you shut the fan off, it takes some time to slowly stop. So the reference point, you still may get stuck in the reference point, but once you know that it's fake, you know that it's not who you are, that's going to be significant. But we were thrilled to have this enlightened guy in the room and all that stuff. And we talked story. We used to make jokes. When Bob leaves, we're going to say, I saw Bob floating to the cottage. I saw him. Then we would joke about, we'll put him on one of those crazy television shows. Bob, the guru, slept with my daughter. We were having such a fun time. But the fact was, he really wouldn't let us take any of that crap seriously. And when I wrote the book, one of the things that made me so happy was that Bob used to teach in his house, in his apartment, and he used to get 4 or 5 people. He would teach Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays. And he said, well, I'd get 4 or 5 people. They used to pay $10 each or something way back. And sometimes I'd get 10 or 15 once in a while. After my book came out, he got 15 or 20 people. He couldn't fit them in his apartment. He got 20 people every session for months or years. And that made me really happy. But when I would tell him, I'd say, Bob, I just got an email. Somebody read the book. They're coming to Australia. And he would laugh, and you'd see him laugh, this laugh, because he and I both knew there's no need for it. But there is a need for it. There was no need for it because it's a simple message. You just got to get it. But I couldn't get it until I needed to look in this guy's eyes and say, God, what he's telling is true. You could see it. I needed that. That's how the dream went. This is all concept. All that happened was the dream went this way, then it went that way, then Bob came to my house, then I asked this question. It's all just what happens, and then we make a whole story of it. But the story's fun. And why did the absolute make all this nonsense? Why did it do it? We can only conceptualize, and we can say to have fun, because just pure oneness is boring. But it still completely boggles the mind. You cannot conceive of how or why oneness made two-ness and three-ness and four-ness. You can't, there's no way to figure it out.
Spiritual hide and seek.
Hide and seek. But the hide and seek can be awfully painful
Yeah.
to the movie characters.
Yeah, it sure can. It sure can. Until you find and stop seeking, basically, and see that whatever you're seeking is.
Yeah, but I mean, look, to me, it really isn't much fun seeing the world today. The wars that are going on, it's not much fun. It's just that it doesn't affect. And I could just say, all right, I'm not going to watch the television, I'm not going to watch the news, but I don't have that nature. So the dream character is going to be the way the dream character is. Bob, he doesn't care about any of that stuff. But this dream character, astrologically, has a lot of planets in the house of politics and loves politics. So I watch the politics, and it's not fun. It's upsetting. It's also confusing. How's it going this way? Now, if I ask myself the question from the point of view of reality, it's a dream. It's Kali Yuga. The Hindus call it Kali Yuga, which is the dark age. It's the age of fighting, et cetera, et cetera. Bob used to say sometimes the good guys win and sometimes the bad guys win. That's how it works. And but whenever I despair too much, despair is not the right word, but when I do feel bad, I always remember what Bob said. He said, thousands will fall on my left, thousands will fall on my right, and I'm not touched. And that's generally the way my life has gone from the age of 53 till now, and believe me, it wasn't like that before.
I think that's a perfect way to end this. Like, I mean, the official part of this, I was really trying to be really mindful of not interrupting you, not talking, just listening to this perfect story. And I will be doing some editing. So I will be cutting, for example, this part right now out, some bits from the intro, so to speak, probably.
Sure.
Was there something I forgot to, or I forgot to ask, or you forgot to mention that you would have liked to touch on?
No, the thing is, you can read all kinds of non-duality books and you can hear all kinds of stuff, and it's pretty much the same. So the way I approached this was, what you said, really, I'm not looking for you to give a talk. I'm looking for you to tell us what it was like to have this man in my house for 5 weeks. And it's very difficult to describe the amount of excitement. I will say, I will tell one other story. You cannot get it from the book. It's in the book, but somehow you can't get it in the book. I don't think you can get it. This was in the first, I think it was in the first 2 weeks before those people came, the visitors and stuff. And, Bob was incredibly intuitive in, one day there was one day when there were visitors there, this lady was saying this stuff, and people were talking, and I just wasn't saying anything. And he says, Braha Sab, he'd call me Braha Sab. It was a joke. He'd say, Braha Sab, you're awfully quiet. And so I started talking to this woman to answer what I thought she was going through. And I'm telling you, it's one of the most brilliant things that ever came out of me. And it came from my studies in the Est, Werner Erhard Est stuff. It was really Buddhism. It was really Zen Buddhism. It was about non-attachment and and acceptance of what is. And anyway, the point is, he says, Braha Sab, you're really quiet. And all of a sudden, this thing comes out, and Bob says, that was really good. It was just brilliant. It addressed, I was telling her, look, if you're going to make this into a strategy so that every time you get upset, you have this strategy, it's not going to work. It's not going to work. You have to be at one with whatever happens. You're not going to use a strategy. You have to get to the point where there's acceptance. When bad shit happens, it happens. You accept it. Anyway, it was a brilliant thing. And Bob just brought it out of me. One day, this is before the visitors come, Bob says, Braha Sab, you're awfully quiet over there. And suddenly I said, look, I've been thinking, why does it take so long to get this? Which is totally stupid, because there is no time and there is no future. So Bob, who is a taskmaster at keeping you in the present with non-duality, he's not going to, now in the beginning with somebody, he'll allow some concepts of the appearance. But as he teaches more and more, he's not going to let you get away with those stupid questions about future and past, because he's already given you that. Now it's time to grow up, right? So I'm asking a question about, why does it take so long for people to get it? And I'm really determined to get an answer that is within the appearance, right? And as he said in the talk, well, what are you here for? To talk about the appearance or reality? I said, I know I'm here to talk about reality, but I want to know from the appearance, right? Anyway, the point of it is, this conversation went on for about 7 or 8 minutes, maybe, I'm guessing. The fireworks were so intense. And I was going, wait. And he'd go, no, you wait. It was hysterical. Now, in the book, you're reading the words, and then it's over. And then you hear the other people saying, oh, God, it was fascinating to watch you guys. And then one of them says, Bob, was it like this with you and Nisargadatta? He says, oh, my God, I was screaming at Nisargadatta, and he was cutting my legs out from underneath me by holding my feet to the fire with reality. So I just want to say that I could not convey in the book. You see the words, but you'd have to hear the volume. It was amazing.
I understand that, and I think one of the best aspects of your book is I think you still convey it really well. I don't know if you're familiar with the book In Search of the Miraculous by P.D. Ouspensky. So it's his account with Georg Ivanovich Gurdjieff, who was this basically.
I know Gurdjieff.
Yeah, so it's his account with Gurdjieff, and I love the book. I've read it 20 years ago, and your book is very similar, I think, to Ouspensky's book in the sense that he chronicles his time spent with Gurdjieff, and I think you're doing basically the same thing with your book. And I just commented on to my wife today that I read some parts of Living Reality out loud to her, and I said, look at the style. I'm a writer myself too. I've written 6 books in Finnish. So look at the style of this writer. He's very concise. These are very difficult topics. You can't wrap your head around these topics. You can't get them intellectually. You can't understand them, but you can grok them. And look at the style of this writer. So I read out loud a few sentences from your book. And that's the reason why I think your book stands out among loads of other books on spirituality in general and non-duality in particular, because basically it's very dry prose because it's just to the point. It's very clear sentences, which are, according to my experience as a writer, immensely hard to write. You have to think straight in order to write clear sentences. And I think you do a perfect job with that. So I think that's the reason why I love the book, and why Fred Davis also, whom we both know, said it's one of, I'm his student, so to speak. And I did a podcast with him about a year and a half ago, and asked him, what would be 3 books you would recommend to somebody getting into non-duality? And Living Reality was one of those 3 books he suggested.
Who is that said that?
Fred Davis from
Fred Davis. Yeah. The thing about it is, though, also, it's dry in the sense when I'm explaining the expressions, what it means, but it's also incredibly fun because I am asking Bob everything that a person that the seekers want to ask with no shame. Like he'd say, James, you're getting into this, you're getting into all the concepts again. And I said, right, but why don't you get into the concepts? In other words, I'm asking the questions that the people would want answered, not because I was thinking about them, but because I had the opportunity of a life to ask anything that I wanted to ask. And he, the most, he would never say, don't ask that. The most he would say is, who wants to know?
Yeah.
But he would answer them. I say, no, Bob, I really want an answer to this. And so, the editor, when reading this book, she said, James, I am laughing out loud from the things that you would ask him, because I have no shame, because it's like I've got God here. I'm not going to let him get away without, telling me what I want to know. It's just,
it's basically like an account of somebody who just met Jesus and, lived to tell the tale, writing about, Jesus, Jesus just hung out at my house for 5 weeks. And these were the silly questions I posed to Jesus.
I'm not going to let him answer the technical proper answer. I want the answer that I want to know, that's going to help me with my evolution, because my mind keeps asking it.
Exactly. And I think
so. If your answer to me doesn't satisfy my question, and I've got you here for 5 weeks, I'm not going to let it go. It's just the way I am. It's the same way he was. When Bob went to India, he said, I am not coming back until I get the answer to life. I'm not coming back. That he had the same kind of intensity I have. I'm not letting this guy out of my house until I get the answer that's going to satisfy. And I've got it in the book.
Exactly.
And the other thing that's really important is, if you get this book, you got to make sure that you read the last chapter, the final chapter, because The biggest thing that hung me up is, why are all these gurus who are so enlightened behaving so badly? And that chapter answers that question. And it answers the question, wait a minute, how could somebody as simple as me actually get to the end, get to the enlightenment? How could that, it can't possibly, I answer the kind of questions that chapter 7, or the last chapter, whatever it is, I think it's 7, is to answer the questions that you're left with, that you might be left with, even though you have the full understanding, you still have some doubt left over. I answer every doubt a person could have in that last chapter. So that's the chapter you got to read for sure.
And it plays out. I did an interview with a Zen priest, Keith Martin Smith, and he just wrote a really good book called When the Buddha Needs Therapy. And we talked extensively about those issues.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. Any last words?
Yes, I have one last word. I can't help it. I can't help it. Once upon a time, there's a guy that wants to get enlightened. So he goes to this ashram and he says, I'm desperate for enlightenment. I've got to have enlightenment. They say, well, we can give you enlightenment, but it's not easy. He goes, okay, I don't care. So, okay, you're going to go in this room. You're not going to come out. We're going to put meals there 3 times a day. The meal will be put under the door. You're going to stay in that room. You're going to meditate all year long with this special technique. And this technique works. And at the end of each year, you're going to get to say 2 words. That's it. And then you're going to go back and meditate for another year. He says, but this will get me enlightened. This will get you enlightened. So he goes in and he stays there for a year. They come, they say, okay, let's get the assessment. How are you doing? You got 2 words. He goes, bed's hard. They go, that's great. That's fine. The bed is hard. Go back, keep meditating. Goes another year. Year goes by. They come back. How are you doing? This is year number 2. How are you doing? Food stinks. They go, we know the food is bad. That's okay. Keep going. Next year comes back. He says, what's your 2 words? He goes, I quit. They go, it's about time. You've been complaining since you got here. Bob loved to hear those jokes.